You ever just look around at the world and wonder, if there's a good and powerful God out there, why is there so much pain? You're not alone. It's a question that has challenged thinkers for, well, thousands of years. In this explainer, we're going to break down the core arguments on both sides of this really profound debate.
This quote, wow, it just gets right to the heart of it. It frames this whole thing like a courtroom challenge. On one side, you've got the idea of a perfect, all-good creator. And on the other, the undeniable reality that, yeah, evil reigns and suffering finds no cease. So, how can both of those things possibly be true at the same time?
And here it is, laid out in the simplest terms. This question is, you could argue, the single greatest challenge to religious belief. How do you square an all-good, all-powerful God with the reality of the suffering we all see every single day? Let's get into the formal arguments.
So to really dig into this, we first need to get the terminology straight. In philosophy, this entire debate is officially known as the problem of evil. And believe me, it's a powerful challenge to the classical ideas about God.
Now, any attempt to answer this problem has its own special name, a theodicy. A theodicy is basically a defense of God's goodness and power right in the face of all this evil. Think of it as the argument for the defense in this huge cosmic court case.
Okay, so let's hear from the prosecution. We'll start with how the existence of evil is used as a powerful argument against the existence of God.
So here's how the logic works. It really breaks down into two core ideas. Premise 1, an all-powerful God could prevent evil. Makes sense, right? He has the power. Premise 2, an all-good God would prevent evil. Again, seems logical. He'd want to. The philosopher J.L. Mackie pointed out the bind here. If both of these are true, then evil shouldn't exist. But it does. So Mackie argued, one of those premises about God has to be wrong.
But you know, it's not just about cold logic. This argument has a deeply emotional side. The philosopher William Rowe asks us to picture this: a fawn trapped in a forest fire, suffering a slow, agonizing death, all alone, completely unseen.
And that brings us to this key idea of gratuitous evil. Just think back to that fawn. It's suffering. It seems to serve no purpose at all. It doesn't build character. It doesn't teach a moral lesson. That is what philosophers mean by gratuitous, suffering that seems entirely, utterly pointless. The existence of even one case of that kind of pain is used as powerful evidence that maybe a perfectly good God isn't out there.
Okay, now we're going to make a hard pivot. We're going to look at a completely different way to approach this whole thing. We'll treat it as a specific case study in theodicy, one that comes from the Quran. And this perspective, well, it doesn't see suffering as a problem to be solved, but as an essential part of the entire system.
This single verse from the Quran just flips the entire problem on its head. It basically says that life is a test, and that both the good things and the bad things that happen to us are the tools of that test. So from this point of view, suffering isn't a flaw in the system, it's a feature.
So how does that actually work? Well, this perspective argues that hardship is what actually drives our moral evolution. Without challenges, we couldn't develop key virtues like patience, or sabr in Arabic, and resilience. The argument is that a life without any trials would just lead to spiritual stagnation. It would leave our character untested and, honestly, our spirits pretty dull.
All right, so what kind of system is this? Is it just random tests being thrown at us from the heavens? No, not at all. This framework presents it as a consistent, law-based system of justice, not just the random whims of a deity.
This slide pretty much lays out the blueprint. First, God sets up universal laws, like the laws of physics and morality. Second, we humans are given free will to choose whether to follow those laws or not. Third, a lot of suffering happens as a natural consequence of breaking them. And fourth, any leftover injustices get perfectly balanced out in the afterlife.
Here's a cool way to think about it. Just like there's physical gravity, this framework suggests there's a kind of spiritual gravity, right? If you ignore the laws of physics and, say, jump off a roof, there's a pretty predictable consequence. In the same way, when moral or social laws are broken, suffering is often the natural, built-in result.
There was an early school of Islamic thinkers who really drilled down on this. Their big idea was divine justice, or adl. They argued that a truly just God wouldn't create pointless evil. So if suffering seems pointless, like with the fawn, that's only because of our limited human perspective. We just can't see the whole picture. And this all ties back to two other big ideas, that we have real free will and that any injustice we see now will be perfectly balanced in the end.
And this verse just drives that point right home. It draws a direct line between our own choices and the hardships we face. The potential for good comes from the divine source that created the system, but the suffering we experience is often a result of our own actions within that system.
So let's wrap this all up. What's the ultimate takeaway from this perspective? It's that hardship isn't some kind of error in the system, it's an essential feature of the design.
So what this framework really does is it changes the question. We stop asking, why did a good God let this happen? And we start asking, okay, how does this event fit into a larger system of divine law and human choice? It's a huge shift from seeing God as a micromanager of every event to seeing God as the architect of a system that we get to navigate.
And this brings us to this really powerful final metaphor, life as a crucible. You know what a crucible is, right? It's a container that uses intense heat to purify metal, to burn away all the junk. In this view, suffering acts just like that heat. It's a force that tests us, that refines our character, and ultimately helps us grow.
And that leaves us with our final question. On the one hand, you have the powerful argument that seemingly pointless suffering is a logical flaw that just doesn't line up with the idea of a good God. On the other hand, you have a framework where suffering is a purposeful feature, designed to test and refine us. Two completely different ways of seeing the very same world. So, which one makes more sense to you?